Welcome to a brand new podcast series on coaching tools and approaches, brought to you by the Association for Coaching, the world's leading international professional body, which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Claudia, coach and entrepreneur and co-founder of The Growing Coaches. Research shows that certain approaches can be effective. However, it also shows that integrating more than one approach can be even more effective. I will be in conversation with experts and look in more detail at some of these approaches, what the research says, how coaches can apply it in their practice, as well as live coaching demos to understand better how the approach is put into practice. Our aim in this series is to bring you closer to the research and the information on a variety of approaches that you might like to put into practice. We have today here Jonathan, who in 2007 already was talking about an integrative model for executive coaching, where you start working on the relationship first and then the behaviors and finally to the system while still paying attention to the relationship throughout. Then in 2021, Qing and Yi-Ling also spoke on a meta-analysis about integrative approaches. They looked into psychologically informed coaching approaches to see the effects they had, the positive effects, the difference between them, and then as well integrative coaching. And so today it would be great to hear from you guys what this is and why coaches should care about this.
Well, shall I start from the work that I was doing back in the early 2000s? Is that helpful, Claudia? To maybe talk about where that thinking emerged from. And my own coaching practice in the late 1990s and early 2000s with clients, that experience talking to other coaches and the different approaches that they described in conversations that they were using suggested that there was wide variance. And as I started my own doctoral research, it was interesting for me to be thinking about, well, what are the key ingredients that make a difference? What are the things that in coaching we should be doing more of? So it was looking at the detail of the behaviours, and clearly different models, different approaches emphasize different behaviours. Of course, all talk about the importance of questions, the importance of listening, but they might structure the conversations different ways. The type of questions that they might be using may be different. So I was interested in trying to explore those questions about the processes that we as coaches should be using to adopt a more evidence-based approach. There had been some discussion. Tony Grant, for example, in his own thesis in 2001, was talking about evidence-based approaches. But really, in those early 2000s, there was very little that had been researched, very few research-based publications that were exploring coaching either process or about outcomes. But lots and lots of claims about what makes the difference, and lots of independent consultants producing models saying this is the model that's transformative, this is the model that you should use. And most of those were IP protected. So it was almost a piece of marketing work that they were doing. So engaging in the PhD, one of the studies that I undertook was to interview coaches and to try to understand from them both the label of what they were doing and also understand the behaviours that they were using. In a second study, I then asked people about particular behaviours that they were using. But what emerged was, despite the labels that people claim to be using, I'm a solution-focused, I'm psychodynamic, I'm gestalt, there seemed much more commonality. Relationships seem to be very important. People who describe themselves as behavioural coaches seem to be also using cognitive and emotional aspects. People who were describing themselves as focusing on the unconscious, so coming from a psychodynamic perspective, yes, that aspect was there, but they were also focusing on conscious. They were focusing on aspects around emotions and cognitions, cognitive cognitions, and also behaviours and how individuals can adapt their behaviours. So there seemed a lot of commonality around this. And that led to the paper. There was a paper in Consulting Psychology Journal. I think that was in 2006. There was a book chapter that was in Excellence in Coaching that drew upon that. That was an output from a basis of practice of an integrated coaching model. And as you described, Claudia, the position that I put forward, not enough evidence to say conclusively, but to say, this is where I think that we're going to end up in the debate. Critical to what we do is the relationship. Without the relationship, without a crucible to do the work, there is no work. We must build a relationship with our clients. And secondly, we must manage that relationship over time. It isn't a switch that we switch on and then we can forget about the relationship. We must continue to work hard to maintain that relationship throughout the coaching assignment. And then we might work in what I described as a series of streams or pools that the coach might move between depending on a number of factors. And I'll talk about the factors in a moment. First of all, the coach might think about behaviours. They might think about, secondly, the emotions. They might think about conscious cognitions and unconscious cognitions. And all of that while still managing the relationship. And that work that we might do as coaches then is based within a system. So what is happening in the environment, that leader or manager in their team, that leader and manager in that team, within a department, within an organization, within a cultural context. And that systemic aspect of the work has been built up in subsequent versions that I've written about in other books, so Becoming a Coach or The Coach's Handbook, for example, that have talked about this particular framework. Now, others over that 20 years, maybe not quite 20 years, 15 plus years, have said, no, any approach that you use, they're all the same. There's no difference between the approaches. And that has been the dominant view. And I've said, well, I disagree with that based on this evidence that are collected from the PhD research and a belief that several criteria should be taken into account for the coach, that the individual who you're working with is really important. And secondly, the presenting issue that they are bringing into the coaching conversation. And let's just take some examples of this. The individual is affected by the stage in their journey of change. They're affected by their personality. They're affected by their cultural context. So there will be a range of factors that influence the individual. And in terms of the presenting issues, just as we might adapt to the individual, and there are some coach competencies that talk about this, but is not really then made explicit in terms of approaches and models. The other aspect is that thinking, judgment, case conceptualization of what's the topic that they're bringing that allows me to think through what approach might be best suited to this. So the metaphor, and you know, Claudia, I love metaphors, the metaphor that I hold in my mind is not only do I need to dance with my partner, and actually they are leading. So I'm following. Yes, it requires a dance between us, but they are the lead. They're making decisions about what we're going to be doing. And my role is not to keep pace with them, is to not tread on their toes, is to facilitate the dance, the beauty of that experience, to facilitate them in this. And secondly is we also need to dance, and this is my role in this, we need to dance to the music that's being played. That it's no good doing the samba to a foxtrot, and it's no good doing the cha-cha-cha to a waltz, because you are out of time with the music. And that's the presenting issue. The mood music, the presenting issue, is what the coach also needs to take into account. So having come to that opinion, that's been widely challenged. Some people who would say no difference, some people who say it's all about the relationship. So when the 2021 paper, the colleagues on the call published, I thought that that was not only a very significant paper, a significant step forward in our journey as coaches, in our maturity towards an evidence-based approach. I smiled broadly because that backed up the hypothesis that emerged from my own research back in 2005, 2006. And this is the point where I hand back to you, Claudia, to colleagues to tell us more about their research and maybe what's coming next, how we can then make judgments, which is where I'm very interested in going to build on the research, to think what types of evidence do we need? What studies should we do to evidence that this is the right model for a cognitive-based problem? This is the right approach that we should be taking for a behavioral-based problem. So how do I improve my skills, behavioral skills in presenting? How do I manage stress and imposter syndrome at work, a topic I know you're interested in? So back to you, Claudia, from that contextual piece of description.
Thank you for giving us the background, Jonathan. And now, as you have mentioned, let's give the floor to Qing and Yi-Ling to tell us about this paper and all the studies related to it as well, in trying to understand the positive impact of the approaches, the difference between the approaches, and of course, this integrative use of them.
Thank you for your invitation, and thank you for Jonathan's the description of integrative model of coaching. So I'm quite excited to present our ideas about our meta-analysis of integrative coaching. And I realized that there's one point we haven't covered in our meta-analysis paper, and I would like to take this opportunity to talk to the audience and Claudia and Yi-Ling to see if you agree with that. Because the term of integrative model or eclectic model originally stem from the eclectic therapy. So basically, it means that the therapist uses multiple sets of techniques to adapt to the client's specific needs and their circumstances. So integrative therapy is an approach to treatment that involves selecting the techniques from different therapeutic orientations and theories that best suited to the client's particular problem. So from my view, the difference between the eclectic coaching and integrative coaching is that the eclectic model selects convenient techniques from the various approaches, such as behavioral and solution focus or humanistic. But integrative coach model aims at putting diverse theoretical systems together under a newly created system that combines various approaches both technically and theoretically. So our meta-analysis paper mainly focused on the integrative coaching. However, we discovered that most of the paper haven't distinguished eclectic or integrative coaching models. So maybe we should add that bit later.
So a couple of things I'd like to highlight in the current coaching research and the trend, and also my recent interest in coaching studies, is when we start to work on that meta-analysis, we didn't expect this result, of course. But I had a feeling like from the past research, according to Jonathan's studies as well, I start to wonder, like, process probably as the important thing as a coach you can influence on instead of a particular model they should use. There are a couple of reasons, I think, behind that meta-analysis. Because first, if we look at the definition of coaching from the beginning, it's a learner-centered activity. So usually it's led by the coachee mainly, and as a coach, like Jonathan says, a dancing partner, we are here to facilitate. So if we say the change is from the coachee, of course, we need to consider their individual differences. But not everyone is fit perfectly with cognitive behavior coaching or only for strengths-based coaching. So I think that's one reason behind that meta-analysis. I was thinking, if change is from individual, is a bottom-up approach, then we need to consider individual differences, their motivation, their environment, and their learning preferences as well. And the second, I think we are inspired by Eric Dehan's a series of papers to talk about critical moments. Because in his papers, he studied critical moments either between coaching pairs or including the third party, like the organization, the stakeholder. And actually, people in that process, their reactions, their behavior change based on the coachee's change or based on the coach's behaviors. So it's like in the dancing, if we say it's a dancing scenario, if we include the third party, everyone's move is influenced by the other person. So the situation may change. So I would say coaching is a continuous negotiation process. So it's really hard to say, okay, we are going to start from CBC. However, we are just stick with CBC throughout the process because things may change. People's behavior, people's attitude, motivation, and their emotions, reactions may change. So that's why behind that meta-analysis, we start to wonder, is there any other way we should look at instead of just model with models? And I think the third one is my recent interest is to see no matter coaching happens in the organization or not, human beings are social animals. We are all influenced or affected by people around us. Even we say this is a life coaching, it's not sponsored by the organization. We all have family, we have colleagues, we have children, we have friends. So I think every decision or every change we like to make, we will consider the overall social society's reactions and their expectation. So again, I would say contextual factors and the social factors really need to be considered in the coaching process, in the changing process. But if we look at this individual model like cognitive behavior change or strengths-based or growth model, I don't really see they consider contextual factors in their model and in their practice. So that's why I think when we started to work on this meta-analysis, we have a couple of assumptions or ideas in our mind to think, why do we only follow one model, or is there any other approach we can develop to help the coaching process more smoothly or even to see a better outcome? So I would say, actually, we didn't actually start from the integrated model, this name. We kind of discovered this model throughout our literature search process. And when we see more and more papers and studies, they combine models. Why do they combine models? And then we start to think, yes, people start to use this integrative approach. Just to add on some points behind this paper. Yeah.
All very relevant points. I'm going to go back to Qing's comment before about eclecticism and integrative, just to make sure I understood correctly what you meant. In an eclectic approach, it would be the coach, based on the situation, choosing which approach they would take. Whereas in an integrative model, it's more of it's structured in advance, or which approaches you will use.
Right. Yeah. That's from my understanding of eclectic and integrative coaching. So eclectic approach is the coach to select deliberately the technique of coaching from various approach. And integrative coaching is that the coach create a new integrative model of coaching that based on different theoretical orientations of psychological informed coaching approaches. So to put it simple, from my understanding, eclectic coaching is more like technically based, and integrative coaching is both technical and theoretically based.
Claudia, colleagues might correct me, but the metaphor that I hold in my mind for this, just to maybe help some people who are listening, is one is pick and mix counter, where you go along and you're just picking out things. You haven't really thought about that. And the other is maybe rocky road, where you have bound them together in a framework that you can articulate that has itself an integration, a theoretical binding. In the case of rocky road, that's chocolate. But so if we just think about this bound together, and that's what I was trying to create in 2006. And I think that's what we should be aspiring to, not a pick and mix counter where you're just picking things off at random.
Yeah.
There is a way that you can articulate how these aspects are bound together, and that they're bound together, held together through a framework, a theoretical framework that you could articulate to your client.
Thank you for your metaphor. It really helps.
I think that brings it to life, definitely. And so in this journey of trying to create an integrative model, so there's two things to it. You have already experimented with integrative models, and in one of your papers you speak about positive psychology with narrative approaches and mindfulness, and there are probably others that you've explored. So if you could tell us more about those, and also then an advice on how coaches should integrate this to their practice.
Okay. So may I share an empirical study that our team has conducted with using the integrative model with the college students? So we published a serious study about it. So basically, we designed, implemented, and evaluated an integrative coaching model called Mindful Agency Coaching, so MAC. So we tried this model with university students to enhance their positive learning dispositions, academic emotions, and high-order thinking capabilities, such as metacognitive ability. So the students' needs of learning development is multidimensional, involving cognitive, affective, motivational, behavioral, relational, and intrapersonal, like self-awareness, as Jonathan has mentioned. So there was no single coaching approach that can satisfy the purpose to facilitate these students for a long-term development. So we interviewed a few students and school coaches in the first place and designed a group-based coaching model integrating positive psychology coaching, narrative coaching, and mindfulness approach in coaching. Plus, we designed a one-to-one motivation interview coaching for individual students in their learning issues. So the effects were quite positive. The statistical results from randomized controlled trials show that students significantly improved mindful agency, academic self-efficacy, emotional intelligence in learning, and metacognition after our coaching. And we did qualitative interviews as well. The results shows that they particularly enhance self-awareness and reflective thinking in their learning, which helped them to move from thinking, what should I learn, to how can I learn better given my resources, and towards why I'm learning this. How does this learning relate to myself and my value? How does it contribute to my life and my community? Some question like that. To develop this sense of self-directed learning motivations and collaborative learning ability. So I honestly cannot imagine any single approach, a single model can do that. For example, only address specific learning, performance, or behavior issues to achieve this outcome that our integrative coaching model can do.
I have one study example. It's mainly designed for academic to cope with peer review process, because I'm not sure whether the audience understand the peer review process can be 12 months long, and sometimes you wait for 5 months just to get first round feedback and review. So in our study, we understand academics are under this kind of long-term stress while waiting for the result, and very likely the high percentage is you get the rejection from the journal and you need to find the next one. So again, we were looking at this particular well-being issue in the higher education's research active academics role. We're thinking there's no one model we can use to help academics. So at that time, we combine two models, because one is called acceptance commitment therapy. It mainly helps people to withdraw their negative emotion and feeling and to move on in their life. But the second, apart from move on, we like to encourage academics to carry on, because the only way to success is you carry on submitting, you take feedback in a more constructive way, and then you carry on. And at a point, you will get that point to find your paper a home to publish in a journal. So at the same time, we need to help them to identify their strengths, to make a proper plan to carry on. So in that study, we combine acceptance commitment therapy and also strength-based coaching in the workshop with them. But we developed a couple of skills for them to start to write about their feeling from the third person's perspective, from some value card sorting, to help them to find out their intrinsic motivation to be a research active academic, because the role is quite different to teaching as well. And then in the end of the workshop, we help them to develop the skills to find their personal strengths, and they can apply their personal strengths to make a more applicable plan for the next submission. And in the study, we didn't just offer them coaching activities. At the same time, we help them to develop these long-term self-reflection skills by writing or self-dialogue, because this issue will be with them almost forever, as long as they work as a research active academic. And so the same with Qing, like at the time, we just couldn't find one particular model for that. And from this process, we couldn't do a quantitative study because we had limited resource at that time, but we reviewed some of their diary, and we also we also interview a couple of them. They really enjoy the idea they can create a psychological space by talking to themselves, like they conduct a self-coaching while writing, and to find out their feelings and also use mindfulness skills to withdraw their negative feeling, and then they start to pick up their positive strengths to help them to come out a plan to move on, to carry on their submission plan. So that's one example for me to combine it as an integrative approach to help people to deal with this more like a prolonged stress from their work situation.
Thank you for that. Thank you for sharing those studies with us. It's very interesting to see how you've combined them. To the coaches out there, what would be your recommendation on how to approach this finding or this thinking of integrative coaching?
Well, I think one of the things that I would say is to recognize in our global coach community that many coaches are trained in one or at best two different approaches. So if you go to many coach training schools, Henley's an exception from that. So Henley takes an integrated approach, but not all coaching schools are the same, and they often teach solution focus or gestalt, or something else. And so a good step is to have a variety of different approaches that one's been trained in. So if you're qualified as a solution-focused coach, go out and do some training in acceptance and commitment coaching. Go out and do some training in motivational interviewing. Go out and do some training in psychodynamic approaches. And so build up a wider repertoire. And that wider repertoire, almost coach training teaches people to cook one meal. It teaches them to do one recipe. What we would be advocating, I guess, from a Henley perspective, and maybe colleagues on the call would do the same, is to say, if you actually go and get trained in a variety of recipes, then you can then deploy them to best suit the tastes of each individual diner, each individual coachee. And that is a journey of a lifetime because, of course, having 2 or 3 is more useful than having 1. Having 5 or 6 is more useful than having 2 or 3. And having 8, 10, 12 evidence-based approaches will be more useful than just having a handful of them. And so once you've started on that journey of building out your skills across a wider repertoire, that becomes the journey of the lifetime, because all of us can continue to improve in each direction each year. So I think that's the first step is understanding those. And the second step for me is, having got that wider range of recipes that are available, how you then turn that into the integrated approach, that rocky road bar that I was talking about earlier. How do you blend them together in a sophisticated philosophical approach that you could articulate to your clients? This is how I coach, and I draw upon this, I draw upon that, I draw upon these, and to come with the evidence that underpins the choices that you're making.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's very insightful. Qing, Yi-Ling, would you guys want to add anything to this?
Yeah, I think adding on from Jonathan's point, I also find regular supervision will be really helpful, because while listening to your coaching mates' experiences and approaches they use, the challenges they encounter, and you learn from each other, because everyone's background is different and everyone is expertise in different approaches. So I think a group-based supervision process would definitely help a professional coach to learn from others and to develop their self-reflection, and they can adapt other people's approaches or experiences or models into their own cases in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. The mutual support and mutual learning from the coach is really important for the self-development and the professional development.
I guess that brings us to my next point smoothly, and because in my opinion, it can, of course, enhance, in this case, technology has a big impact on everything that we're doing at the moment as coaches. And so the question now is, how does this impact integrative coaching? And of course, now we can have group supervision with everybody around the world and different people, different cultures. And so that could be one of the benefits I see. But it would be lovely to hear how you feel technology can hinder or benefit integrative approaches.
Well, let me step in again. I'm sort of reluctant to keep going first, but a few thoughts from my perspective as Senior VP at Coach Hub. So we're a digital coaching business. We have 3,500 coaches across the world. And we have then thought about and built our own integrative coaching model, which is called the Coach Hub One model. And it draws upon systemic aspects, and it draws upon all of those aspects that I talked about, what it is to be human. And it also thinks about the importance of the relationship. So we do a relational aspect. We think about behavior, cognition, emotion, and physiological sensations, so senses. And we have mapped onto this particular model particular approaches. So we're gradually training our coaches to have a wider repertoire of frameworks that they can call upon. So they might be somebody who is, let's just say they're a behavioral-based coach, or they're a person-centered approach. So person-centered would map onto quite nicely the relationship aspect. A behavioral coach maps clearly onto behavioral. Then we would look at cognitions, and we might look at cognitive behavioral, or we might look at ACT, or we might look at compassion-based coaching. Then similarly into emotion, into sensation, body coaching, and to those systemic factors that I was talking about earlier. Of course, one of the things that is more challenging on digital spaces, and there's also a counter to this. So one of the challenges is the ability to build the relationship with clients. And there is an argument in the literature that says that it's harder to build relationships in digital spaces. We would be having a very different conversation if we were physically together. And one aspect that would have occurred, we would have probably shaken hands, or there would have been some appropriate use of touch during our meeting. We would have felt more intimate in that we would be able to see more clearly people's facial expressions. We would have been able to see more of the body language. We're only seeing maybe the top half of people. You can see the top half of my body. In the case of other colleagues, we could just about see a little bit of shoulder and head. You might see how my feet are moving that give you a clue about my anxiety that you might comment on if we were face to face. So there are some aspects that are lost. But of course, the things that are gained in digital is that we would never have met. We would never have met to be able to fly people across from China, or us to fly across to China, two different locations in Europe. So I'm out here in Milton Keynes, Yi-Ling's maybe in London, Claudia, you're in Amsterdam. So coming together, a convenience of digital enables this to happen. And the other benefit that we see from our work is that people are often, because there is less feeling of intimacy, people are less inhibited. So you move very rapidly into talking about sensitive issues, and people are more willing to be challenged and to challenge in those spaces than they might do if they were face to face. When in many of our European cultures, people take account of the person who's crossed the table from them and avoid disagreement, argument, or getting into the real substance of an issue. That seems to be less of the case in those digital spaces. Now, there are questions, and you raise a really interesting question. What are the implications for integrated approaches? And I think that, for somebody who's listening to this, would be a perfect PhD research study.
Well, I would like to adding up to what Jonathan has said. I totally agree that digital space for coaching, like online coaching, can offer many benefits, like greater flexibility in time and place, and giving clients sufficient privacy and a secure sense of distance, lower personal costs, etc. And of course, we have many challenges. I'll share with you some practical issues, realistic issues that I experienced. And this experience only comes from myself and my research team, coaching team in the Chinese context. It's the realistics that we need to recognize and the challenges that we need to face, basically. So apart from what Jonathan said, the relationship and the interactive model in the coaching can be changed in the online form. I noticed that the sense of space can be changed as well. It's not only the physical space, but also the psychological space and the boundary of work and being coached can be mixed up. So as an educational coaching psychologist, I often receive quite a lot of requests from the teachers and parents of how to facilitate online teaching and learning and how to balance work and life, because the students are taking online courses at home. So in the traditional way of coaching, that we can invite these parents and teachers to our coaching session and create a space for them to reflect very freely about their work. But now in the online coaching and they have to lock down at home, they mixed up the coaching space, the teaching space, the working space, and education, parenting space. So this physical mixed up space can create emotional and psychological mixture of all this kind of work for them. So they may get more confused. We found this quite difficult to deal with that. And added up to the interactive issue, well, because we did quite a lot of group-based coaching, we still have the mutual interaction with the individual coachees in the online form. But we found out we need to make more effort to excite the participants and engage them into the process. And participants may not have as much as effective interactions with each other on the online form, particularly in our culture. In most cases, they don't know each other very well, and they don't show enough interest in getting to know each other so well as in the face-to-face coaching. So the group dynamic is not as great as before. That's how we found. And we wonder how we can cope with that issue. What we have tried is to design more collective activities and reflective sessions in the online group-based coaching, and trying to encourage the participants to use chat box more often. It's like a bullet screen moments where you watch the video at any time during the coaching, like they're watching the videos, and try to increase the sense of participation and interactions. But we're still experimenting with different approaches. But I wonder, is there any better way, or I just want to learn more clever experiences from my colleagues.
Yeah, I think the example I just gave earlier about the academic coaching, because the first part of the research, it happened before the pandemic. So the workshop was conducted face-to-face. And I think as a coach, it's when you conduct coaching face-to-face in person, it would be easier to pick up the coache's personal preferences, and also to pick up their individual differences by their body language, and they're more open up. But the second and third part of that project, when we conduct the personal individual coaching, because that was the time in 2020, so everything happened online. So I started to notice it's not that easy to get to know coachee easily, because when we talk about integrative approach, we need to consider all the contextual factors and the social factors, and also their individual learning preference. So I found in online, because that's safe and security space, it's not easy to pick up from their body language and to know whether they are accepting your idea or whether there is a sign of resistance. So it's much, much more difficult. So later I decided to give a longer time of coachee, to give them more time to talk about themselves, even before we start the actual coaching conversation. Because from their story, from their background, from their sharing, I could use that time to really pick up what kind of person they are, and then start to combine the approaches I design to sort of slightly like customize a different kind of conversation with each of them. Otherwise, it was really difficult just to see them online and try to understand them, to give me a holistic picture of who they are. But in person, it's much easier to pick up from their conversation, from their body language, from the way they sit down. But online, it's just much difficult. Yeah.
Thank you for giving us that view into your experience in applying this, and the challenges with the relationship and understanding each individual's context and personality. And that one way of going about this, of course, is before jumping into an approach to or the approaches in your integrative model, to really get to know them and dedicate more time to that building of relationship and understanding who that person is. That's very insightful. Another point to this, which is very close to my heart, is of course the things that you do offline and online with the client, and homework is one of them, for example, or the work they do in between sessions. And I wonder how you apply this or include this how you use the period in between the sessions for integrative approaches.
So I think one of the things that Claudia raises here is about whether different approaches advocate the use of intersessional work, homework, that we often call that in coaching. And from my experience and my understanding of those different approaches, there doesn't seem to be much variation in terms of the theoretical described models, and the greatest variation seems to come based on the individual coach, and that some coaches prescribe work between sessions and some coaches don't. The majority seem to prescribe activities for clients to do, but not everybody does. And the type of activity that is prescribed seems to vary more to the individual client and to the preferences of the coach than maybe to the individual model. My own view on whether intersessional work, homework is useful is that for most clients, between most sessions, I am encouraging them to engage in an activity. And that activity that they might engage with might be testing out the plan of action that they've described or articulated in that session. It secondly might be reflection activity, gathering information, gathering feedback, thinking about their behavior, thinking about the behavior of others in response to their behaviors, being more aware of their emotions or thoughts. And thirdly, they might be specific activities that could be journaling, diarying, reading, watching videos. Sometimes in those instances, I might share content with them. I might send them a book in the post. I might send them a link to an article from HBR. I might send them a link to something that's on YouTube or a TED Talk for them to watch. And at Coach Hub, that is our philosophy, to encourage people to do intersessional work. And we've built a library of 10,000 pieces of content, video, audio, that our coaches are then aware of and would direct people to. Go and have a look at the content that's around emotional intelligence. Go and have a look at the content that's about providing feedback, for example. So that would be my take, Claudia, on this particular perspective. But I'm sure colleagues have got other views or perspectives.
Yeah, I think in some of my coaching project in the practical side cases, I never really designed a particular type of task because everyone's needs was different. So some of the homework or assignment was writing a particular diary, but some of them probably just go to review their time strategy. How did they look after their time? Because even the goal was similar, they like to achieve like 1 or 2 paper submission of that year, but their needs and their situation were all different. So that's why I never prescribed like a particular type of assignment before the coaching. Usually that was emerged from the conversation, and they started to discover that's something they need to do probably between now and the next session. Then we kind of agree on that. So how about before the next session, if you can spend half an hour to do A, B, and C, you just point out now. So that's kind of my approach to fit with my integrative model, integrative coaching approach, because there's nothing really fixed or already decided before the conversation. Yeah.
That's a very interesting. Well, yeah, Claudia, I just want to add something to that question because I found that question really interesting. It's even inspired me to think about a research question, really. Because from the meta-analysis research, we found rarely paper describe the assignment of coaching. They usually describe the approach of coaching or the main coaching activities, but rarely paper write about this assignment. So I wonder, is it a personal choice of the coach and coachee, or as Yi-Ling said, it's emerged from the coaching conversation? What will be the difference with assignment or without assignment in the whole coaching package? Is there any difference of the effectiveness? So we don't know that yet. Maybe, well, audience can develop a research thesis out of the question. And from my practice, well, it really depends on the coachee. I often ask them, would you like assignments? Would you like me to assign you some tasks or some activities to do during the session? Would you like a more structured way or more unstructured way? So I let the coachee to choose from whether they would like assignment or not, or in how much structured activity would be. Last month, I just coached a group of doctors in a hospital. They would like to, I took the mindfulness-based coaching to help them to release the work stress from the hospital. And after the first session, I asked them, would you like any activities to do? And they thought about it and they said yes. And they chose to do the structured way of assignments. So I assigned them 10 minutes mindfulness and do something creative or do something more self-aware to them. So I designed these activities. I sent this paper to them and they need to report to me kind of by ticking the activities that we designed online. We form a digital group and they tick all the activities. And in order to engage them more, I did those activities myself as well. So I need to tick the box myself first and then see the coach has already ticked it. So they will do the activities as well. So that's one example of doing the structured way of assignment. And I think that's beneficial for them. Most of them says that the assignment actually taught them quite a lot through these self-reflective coaching sessions.
So one more point to add, because it's really interesting when we talk about assignments. I just remember sometimes I really need to see whether the type of assignment will be accepted by a particular coachee. For instance, when I mention about mindfulness, the usual example I use, because I like to do meditation quite a lot, but some of them are really against, no meditation. So I felt like even talking about the type of assignment, I became more flexible now. I say, so do you have a particular exercise you like to do to help you to withdraw your feelings from work? Because if I only talk about meditation, some of them just were so against it. So I just find, assignments probably helps, but at the same time, probably you need to be more, probably a little bit more flexible to see whether they are happy to like to follow your exercise or they like to develop their own exercise for the similar purpose. Yeah, that's just one thing I like to highlight.
Yeah, exactly. Just ask them after a coaching session, and ask your coachee and clients what they would prefer to do first, and then we can help them to design these activities.
So if we go back to the start of our conversation between eclectic and integrative, basically for homework or for the time in between the session, it sounds more like it's a pick and choose based on what has come up from the session. So more of an eclectic approach rather than something that is more structured from before. So that's very interesting. And also we spoke now about, of course, a more directive and structured approach versus a more collaborative way of building the homework, which is more towards the way of coaching where the client leads the conversation. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I still don't think we kind of pick and choose through the way. We have a framework, a big umbrella there, but we just keep the process flexible and not that specific. It's kind of, we still have a structure, but through the conversation, we keep everything a bit open and fluid, and then we can find the coaches' reactions and their preference and their learning style and the progress. Then we kind of guide them into that structure, but not in a very specific way. So that's one thing I kind of like to add on after Claudia's comments on our conversation. I think in my approach, I still have the framework as a big umbrella. It's just in between, I keep everything more flexible for coaches because sometimes they have their learning style. Sometimes they have their, the different stage of their life. So they may prefer a particular way than the other way. But again, they are still under that big umbrella. For instance, the coaching approach I use for still under that acceptance, commitment therapy and strength-based coaching. Yeah.
So you would still choose within the approach you decided on your integrative approach that was appropriate for that?
Yeah, I think the overall they are still under that big framework and umbrella of integrative approach. But I think some small decisions in terms of assignment, exercise, or the length of our conversation, I gave them that kind of flexibility. Because I think in learning process, we all need to consider that self-determination theory. They need some kind of freedom. They can choose to do certain things and they can choose certain activity don't prefer. However, everything is still, I think it's under a big structure. Yeah, that's more my approach for the example I just mentioned.
Perfect. Any thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, well, I'd like to talk about a little bit about the research, really, because Yi-Ling and Jonathan talk a lot about coaching practice. So our meta-analysis actually was kind of the first paper trying to get an overview of the psychological informed coaching approaches in workplace. And there are a couple of directions that we can move forward. So since there's a large number of existing empirical studies did not specify coaching design in a sufficient detail, so we strongly suggest that when we publish coaching paper, we write more details about it, including the assignments, right? And also, we need a more transparent data analysis and presentation in these coaching papers as well, trying to offer more information about how effective they are. And also, we talked about the effectiveness of integrative coaching, integrative model. And what we found is the integrative model based on psychological approaches. But there may be some integrative model based on other theoretical approaches, such as adult learning theories or a lot of management theories. So we wonder, is there any difference between these integrative coaching models? How can we use them and how do we apply them in the real world coaching? So that's all sorts of questions that we may ask in the future research.
So my concluding remark, Claudia, is to reflect back on a paper from Consulting Psychology Journal, which described the dodo effect, and a paper by, I believe, Richard Kilberg. And he highlighted the story from Alice in Wonderland, where the dodo bird presides over a race, and the gun goes off for the race between the different characters in this story, and they all run in different directions. And at the end of the race, the claim is, all shall have prizes. When Alice asks the question, but who won in this race where everyone is going in different direction? All shall have prizes, says the dodo bird. But of course, in the real world, real races don't run in different directions. And that's what we've been doing in coaching. We've been pretending that all our interventions are of equal value, whatever the presenting problem. What this research, what I hope colleagues who are listening to the podcast will take away, is a recognition that the evidence is telling us that not all coaching models are equal, that skilled evidence-based coaches should be picking appropriate models to fit their client, not their choices. And secondly, they should be picking models that are adapted or that are the most suitable for the presenting problem the client is bringing in. What we don't know yet is which particular models are best suited for which particular presenting problems. And that's the question that over the next 3, 4, 5 years, I'm sure that coaching researchers will be answering. And the second thing that I think, apart from that realization to recognize not all models are equal, is an encouragement for people listening to go out and to engage in more learning, to engage in different models so they can add solution focus to their Gestalt approach, or they can add to the GROW model with acceptance and commitment coaching, or they can add to cognitive behavioral coaching by motivational interviewing, and by building up a wider repertoire of different frameworks and approaches that over time they can build their own integrated approach that they can articulate to their clients, how an evidence-based approach that allows them to adapt to meet their client where their client is, not where their individual training as a coach comes from. And secondly, that they've got a wide set of skills that allow them to actually adapt to the presenting problem the client brings with them. And only then do I think that we'll be in a position, and maybe that'll take us 3, 5, 7, 10 years to get to that point. I've waited 15 years or more to get to this point. We've got the evidence that integrated is better. A variety, flexing and adapting to clients, is better than one approach. One size fits no one. a variety of different sizes is what we need. Now we need to understand how we can better measure clients and better understand presenting problems to pick the right intervention for them and the challenge or issue that they bring with them. And if we achieve that, if colleagues who are listening to the call take that away, then I think that that's a great insight and an opportunity for them to continue their learning journey, as we all do as professional coaches, seeking to get better and better in service of our clients.
Finally, where can our listeners find out more or get in touch with you?
Really happy for people to connect to you on LinkedIn. That's always a pleasure. An encouragement to go and have a look at my personal website, jonathanpassmore.com. There are loads and loads of free papers to download on there, and go and have a read of some of the work about integrated approaches that I've described in books such as The Coach's Handbook or Excellence in Coaching.
Yeah, I'm happy to be connected from the LinkedIn and my Twitter. And also, at the same time, I'm the editor of International Coaching Psychology Review. And we have like regular empirical or literature review or book review on coaching psychologies. And they're on BPS division of coaching psychology's website. So the audience are very welcome to come to download the papers. In our committee, we also start to launch a regular podcast with variety of the topics. So yeah, I think you're very welcome to come to listen to our podcast.
Great. So yes, I'm available on LinkedIn as well. And also I'm a fellow with the International Society for Coaching Psychology, and you can find my profile and contact information there as well.
Thank you so much for joining me today in this discussion about integrative coaching models.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode by the Association for Coaching. I have been Claudia Day. We hope this episode offers you some new insight and inspiration. For 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organizations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or explore our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. There, you can keep up to date with our latest episodes, enjoy the wealth of digital learning offerings, and gain insights from our Coaching Perspectives magazine.